I also want to talk about China's disinformation campaign, because you mentioned that a little bit in one of your recent articles. And we noticed that since the outbreak, China has been conducting a large-scale disinformation campaign. So can you share with us some of your observations?
Yes, this is something that's rather new for China, at least as far as targeting other countries. They've used this kind of disinformation tactic against Taiwan, but not so much against countries in other parts of the world. So it's new. There appears to be some degree of cooperation, at least tacit cooperation, between Chinese entities and Russian, potentially Iranian as well, that are sharing disinformation. And the themes of the disinformation include this allegation that the United States military was perhaps responsible for developing the virus that was then unleashed on the world. That's one. They've also conducted or spread disinformation about the way in which European governments and other governments have handled the outbreak. I think this is targeted primarily at both a domestic audience in China and also perhaps at audiences in the developing world. I don't think they believe they're going to convince the United States government or the American people that somehow the US Army was responsible for COVID-19. I don't think by spreading disinformation about the way the European governments have handled it, that they're going to produce outrage among the European populations. I think they're probably aiming a lot of this at countries in the developing world.
Why do you think they're targeting now, like mainly at people who are in developing countries or countries other than America?
I think that's a main focus of PRC strategy that perhaps people in the West have not paid enough attention to. And I think Chinese strategists see the developing world as important in the future for a variety of reasons, a source of resources, markets, and so on, but also a source of diplomatic support for China in international institutions. And what we're seeing now is an example of that. China appears to have exerted a disproportionate influence in the World Health Organization. We don't know exactly how that happened, but probably by gaining support among other developing countries to appoint someone as the head of that organization who is quite friendly towards China. And now the WHO will probably not conduct a true, thorough, and independent investigation. So China has been working hard to gain influence, not only in the WHO, but other international institutions. And the main way in which they do that is by getting support from developing countries, which are numerous and have many votes and can influence the way these organizations run.
Do you think China's this disinformation campaign is actually working?
It's hard to judge. As I said earlier, I don't think it has any benefit for them in the United States. It's made people quite angry. Maybe that's what they intend, but it's probably not very helpful. I don't know what the impact has been in Europe, but generally, as the crisis has gone on, opinion in Europe seems to be turning more against China. It might have been more favorable at the beginning, so it doesn't seem to be working there. I think the key question is it working in the developing world? And there I don't know, but it's possible that it is, because the question would be, what are the alternative sources of information that people have? And they may be hearing a lot from Chinese outlets of various sorts and perhaps not what we might consider more objective information.
What are some of the strategies that the US can adopt to counter China's disinformation campaign?
Transparency, and insisting on transparency, calling to account Chinese spokesmen who engage in spreading falsehoods. So one of the things that's quite unusual about this episode is that fairly senior officials in the Chinese system have publicly repeated these false claims or done so on social media platforms and so on. So I think calling attention to that and applying pressure in response to those kinds of statements is one way of handling it. And of course, providing accurate information to the extent that it's available about what's actually happening in Europe or what's actually happening in the United States is another way of combating this. I don't think it's helpful for the United States or other democracies to try to engage in disinformation campaigns of their own, or to spread unsubstantiated stories about the extent of Chinese culpability unless and until that can really be established.